You can find most glossies and some genre magazines on newsstands, and although literary journals and zines are tougher to find, many chain bookstores carry a handful. Most are not distributed through traditional channels because their low print runs do not make national distribution feasible. Some specialty magazines, like in-flight magazines, require, well, a flight, but you can usually order sample copies of most directly from the publishers. Or you might visit a local bookstore and review what you can find there. Quimby's bookstore in Chicago carries tons of magazines. Ask the clerk where they keep the type of magazine or journal you're interested in. Then choose a few to read. You can further narrow down your search in about 60 seconds. Here the goal is to review the guidelines and assess the competition and the writing. First, feel the book. Is it professionally printed? Would it look good on your parents' mantle? Many journals list their contributors on the back cover. Recognize any names? Writers you admire or whose work reminds you of your own? Check the masthead. Who's the editor? Many magazines list guidelines in this space too. What's their reading period? Length requirements. If the guidelines you've read elsewhere differ, go with what's in their magazine. Lastly, count how many stories they publish. The more stories, the better your odds. Now read the first few lines of the opening story. Does it catch your attention? It did the editors. Head to the back of the magazine or to wherever the contributors are listed. What's their level of experience? Writers with multiple credits? Emerging writers with few or no credits? Is this magazine a market for seasoned or emerging writers? Most editors are looking to discover new talent, but it's a good idea to get a sense of the quality pool the editors are choosing from. This first journal deserves further investigation. Now do another 60-second review. Your goal is to assess about 10 magazines.
I know editors are always saying, read the publication first. And you know, if you read every publication, cover to cover, that you're going to send to, you had better hope that you live to be about 300 years old. To be familiar with 2 or 3 that you're going to send to, or 4 or 5, is important.
To narrow down your picks to Joe's magic number of 4 or 5, we need a stack of about 10. Now, you're not going to buy all 10. The stack is to be thumbed through in the store. You'll lug today's contenders to a quiet alcove. You're going to be camping out. We suggest you bring snacks. And read a complete story. But what should you be reading for?
I would not look for themes because they change. Any kind of trend you want to chase in the literary journal field is going to be over by the time you write that piece, probably. If a piece explodes off the page, or if you were moved deeply by a piece in River Teeth, then you know if you have a piece like that, and by like that I don't mean content or written that way. I mean that piece that has the ability to turn someone up on some editor's world, then I would send them that piece.
Read a magazine for what's not in there. If we're not publishing hard science fiction over 2 or 3 issues, we probably never do. If we're not publishing anything with kind of has a pornographic element, we just don't. And surprisingly, we get all of those stories in the magazine, and submissions, and we just can't publish them.
The more important reason probably for reading the magazine is that you want to find magazines that you like. You want to be reading something that you like enough that you might want to subscribe. And then I would turn the whole thing around. Instead of the writer asking the editor, what do you want? What will I be looking for in reading the magazine? I would say, what is it that you enjoyed about it? Try to analyze that to understand what it is about those stories that you enjoyed, and you'll be much closer to writing a story that'll go with that magazine than you would be just from hearing it from somebody else.
How many stories are they publishing? How long are they? All editors have certain types of taste. You certainly, if you read the first and last story that are published, you can probably tell what the editor's favorite stories of that issue were. Not necessarily, there may be other reasons for putting them in, but they thought those stories were important. So I think figuring out where you fit into the scheme of it is probably one of the first things that a writer needs to do, and can be the hardest part of the job, because we're all much better at labeling other things than our own work.
A good reading of the work would, I hope, also suggest the extent to which we like stories that work around some transforming moment, that lead to a shift in condition or understanding, as opposed to stories that are exercises in minute description of character or place, no matter how exquisite. A good reader, I think, would begin to sense the difference between static and dynamic stories and see that we're interested chiefly in dynamic stories, stories in which something happens as opposed to stories that in which the condition of the main characters is essentially the same at the end of the story as at the beginning. I don't know how many readers get all that information out of reading our work, out of reading the magazine, but it's there to be seen, and that's what I'd recommend.
When the bookstore is ready to close, or people begin to stare, it's time to decide on a few promising titles and continue your familiarization at home. Purchase a few. Later you might subscribe. Subscriptions give you a sense of an editor's choices over a period of time. Eventually you'll build a library of magazines to which you can submit. A word of warning though, after reading a magazine, writers shouldn't imagine what an editor wants and write to those imagined specifications. By purchasing magazines, you are entering into a larger writing community. And if you're serious about writing, consider this process part of your job. These purchases are investments in your writing career. And oh, keep those receipts, they are tax deductible.